China has been the world's factory for the past 40 years. But there is a clear possibility that India will replace China as the world's factory in the future. Not only does India have sufficient capacity to serve as the world's factory, but its future is very bright. And the era of India wielding a powerful influence in the world economy will soon come.
China's population of 1.4 billion has started to decline. As India overtakes China to become the country with the largest population in the near future, it seems that the world's factories will also move from China to India. In China, it is said that births will decrease by 850,000 in 2022. As for birth, 9.56 million Chinese people were born last year and 10.41 million people died. Originally, it was expected that the population would peak and begin to decline around 2030, but the trend is progressing about 8 to 9 years faster than originally expected. China's population has grown tremendously from 660 million to 1.4 billion over the past 40 years. But this growth trend is changing rapidly. Chinese society has applied the one-child policy for the past 40 years. However, the cost of raising children and getting married is so high that many people give up on marriage because it is difficult for them to afford it. Furthermore, in China, there is an extreme gender gap. China has a lot more men. For every 100 women, there are 120 men. The fact that there are fewer women in the population means that there are fewer women to give birth. China has been a very aged society since 2014, when the labor-producing population peaked. The Chinese government abolished the one-child policy in 2016. From 2021, the Chinese government has turned to a three-child policy to prevent population decline. China's fertility rate for married couples is 1.15, which is very low compared to the world as a whole. East Asian countries such as Korea, Japan, and China share a common population decline. Poland, a poor country, had a low birth rate in its own country. But when Polish people immigrated to the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, where the standard of living is good, they gave birth to an average of 2.5 children. However, East Asian immigrants tend not to have many children either in the United States or Canada, which seems to be because of the burden of the high cost of higher education.
China has implemented reforms and an open market policy and participates in the world's supply chain. Participation in the exodus of China's rural workers has doubled the labor force in a short period of time. increasing the input operating labor force by 140 million from 1990 to 2017. At this time, the supply of labor was exploding more than the demand for labor around the world. So, while wages did not rise, China recorded a huge surplus in balance of trade.
The surplus becomes excess savings, and the Chinese government uses the money to purchase United States government bonds or assets. In the meantime, China has been in low interest rate status for decades, but this trend is changing.
It is becoming increasingly impossible for China to keep production costs low. Labor costs have already more than doubled compared to Vietnam. Looking at both global trends and China's domestic situation, it's almost impossible to go back to China's economic situation of the past 30 years.
Looking at China's current domestic situation, industries that require low wages, such as the garment industry, have already withdrawn to Southeast Asian countries. If the rate of population decline becomes faster than it is now, China will have to produce a higher value-added commodity.
There is a famous saying about the three countries of Japan, Korea, and China. In Japan, people get old after living well, and in Korea, while living well, they get old. But in China, it is said that the people get old before they live well.
China's position is that essential safety net elements must be prepared for the aging society, such as national health insurance and national pension, but China is still quite vulnerable. So, by 2030, China is sure to enter the state of being a super aging society. The big challenge for China's leadership for the next 10 years is whether the care burden of the elderly can be evenly distributed in Chinese society while maintaining the economy. China's greatest economic asset is its abundant high-quality labor force of over 200 million people. If the population declines and wages continue to rise, China's competitiveness will continue to decline. So while China is fighting a war for hegemony with the United States, there have been many predictions in recent years that it will become increasingly impossible for China to catch up with the United States. In the past, it was predicted that China would overtake the United States by 2030, but that event has been postponed for a long time, or even predicted to be impossible forever. The fact that prevents China from catching up with the United States is the critical Western view of the recent negative behavior of the Chinese government. For example, inconsistent policies such as unreasonable blockades of several years, following the zero-corona policy and then suddenly lifting the blockade, and regulations imposed on various people and companies against common sense. There are several predictions from Western governments and corporations that China is beyond the good times of the past 40 years. The first idea is that the US directs a siege in the field of technology, such as semiconductors, to prevent China from developing further technologically. America's enemies are China and Russia, but if the semiconductor technology of the United States and the West enters China, they can produce high-tech weapons with semiconductors and use those weapons against the West. The next issue is China's insufficient response to its aging society and rising labor costs. Insufficient response to the aging society will develop into social instability in China, and the rise in labor costs will lead to an increase in the cost of products, which will mean China is no longer attractive as a factory for the world. However, the United States has the fourth largest population in the world and a considerable advantage that young workers are continuously flowing in from abroad. The constant influx of labor to the United States from abroad indicates that the quality of life in the United States is better and more attractive than in other countries. India is the second most populous country after China. China's population is 1.415 billion, and according to many data, it is estimated that India's population will surpass China's in the second half of this year, around June or July. India's population has exploded despite the Indian government's population control policy. As India's population increases in this way, Western officials are predicting that there is a high possibility that India will take over the factories that China had. The Indian government is showing confidence, but India needs infrastructure, such as highways, railways, ports, and electricity to grow its economy. However, India's infrastructure has been chronically lacking. The problem is that the expansion of infrastructure investment is still uncertain at the national level. Among young people in India, the least popular field of study is civil engineering, which is necessary for infrastructure construction, but people tend to think of it as an unappealing job. Almost all university students in India prefer to work in an office mainly with computers and software. So, even if the Indian government tries to invest in infrastructure, there is a shortage of manpower for the work site. So there is a problem with building the infrastructure that is lacking in India. However, India has an abundant young workforce and many people who can speak English. If we make good use of these aspects, such as the Western mindset of young Indians, it will take time, but India can become the world's factory after China.
India has the advantage of having a large population, but the population is quite young.
If we look at the population aged 0 to 14 in China, that share of the total population is less than 18%, but in India, it is 31%. The proportion of young people in India who can have a baby is almost twice that of China. On the other hand, the elderly population who need support due to aging are about 13% in China, but only about 5% in India.
Compared to China, India has a relatively young working population and a large English-speaking population, giving it significant advantages in terms of economic growth.
The West expected that China's political system would change from communism to democracy when it developed economically. But this prediction was wrong, and China, which has grown economically, continues to threaten neighboring countries.
So, the United States is trying to prevent China from playing a role as a world's factory and from challenging the United States for hegemony. The United States and the Western world hope that India, a democratic country, will take over the role of the world's factory.
Not only does India have sufficient capacity to serve as the world's factory, but its future is very bright. And the era of India wielding a powerful influence in the world economy will soon come. Thank you for watching the video, 1.4 billion Young India, the protagonist of the future, provided by History and Current Events. I'm Rebecca, Olivia, Abigail, Jody, Lydia, Julia, and Tony have contributed so far as narrators. Thank you.